Sasquatch Roadkill. This awesome story is written by Smokey Sasquatch Stories. So grab your coffee, sit back, and enjoy the show. My name's Dan. I don't want to waste your time, so let me get right to it. I witnessed a Sasquatch get hit by a semi at 70 miles per hour, and that's just the start of the whole story. What happened afterwards was horrific and unbelievable. Yeah, I can hardly believe it, even though there were 2 other witnesses who saw the whole thing with me. Let me first introduce my buddy, Morgan. His name is Morgan, and he's not a woman. We ride motorcycles together, and we've been buddies since grade school. Our motto was always, ride together, die together. When we came up with that, we were young, and I guess we thought it sounded cool. But it ended up being eerily relevant this late September evening on a highway in the mountains of Idaho. We met up at a Denny's that morning, and we planned to take a motorcycle trip all the way up to Montana that weekend. Weather was perfect for it, mid-60s, clear and sunny. Only clouds in the sky were those wispy ones, way up high. We both ordered the Grand Slam special with a cup of coffee. Just like our hogs, we needed some fuel for the long ride ahead of us. One of the trucks parked outside the window had one of those Bigfoot bumper stickers. You know, the ones you see everywhere. It said, Bigfoot undefeated hide-and-seek champion or something like that. And so we got to talking about Sasquatches, and Morgan thought the subject was nothing but a joke. I was a Bigfoot agnostic back then. I didn't really have an opinion. But the fella sitting at the table next to us was a diehard believer, and he just happened to be the guy who owned the truck with a bumper sticker. His name was Rich. He had more than a few stories to tell us about the beasts of the mountain, as he called them, and he didn't seem like a man to lie. He was a little older than us, probably late 60s, retired, and seemed like a good old boy. Morgan still wasn't buying any of it. He leaned back against his chair with a scowl and said, "I'll believe it when pigs fly," while taking a bite of his bacon. Little did we know, he sort of predicted the future right there before we headed out. Rich asked us where we were headed. I showed him the route we were taking up to Montana, and he said, "Well, fellas, if talking to me didn't convince you, you might both be believers by the time the trip's over. Yeah, even you, Morgan," he went on. "About 4 hours north of us is one of the most heavily populated Sasquatch territories in this part of the U.S., and if I ain't mistaken, your path takes you right through there." I was going to ask him where he got that info, but we really didn't have time for more stories, so I thanked him for the heads up and we headed out. I took point, and Morgan followed behind, as we hit the open road right around noon. There's not much to tell of during the first 4 and something hours. Ride was picture perfect. Almost no other cars out on the road, surprisingly desolate for a weekend. Just 2 old boys and their bikes, seeing where the road leads them. Eventually, sure enough, it led us to that mountain pass Rich was talking about, and right about then, Morgan had to take a piss. There weren't any gas stations or nothing for probably at least over an hour, so he decided he would just pull off the road and use the great outdoors. Ironically, about 30 feet ahead of where we pulled off, there was a little sign next to the road. It was a Bigfoot crossing sign with the outline of a Sasquatch walking. Seemed like a joke thing, and I got a laugh from it. I pointed it out to Morgan, and he said, "Perfect. Now we'll know for sure if those things are real or not, because if they are, they sure as hell won't let me walk into their backyard and take a piss." So he made his way down and up the bar ditch, crossed through the tall dead grass, and took a few steps into the forest. From the road I could hear him shout, "Hey, big dumb, how you like this?" The man never grew up past boyhood, let me tell you. And then he turned around and said, "Let's see if they talk back. Rate my Bigfoot call." And he started making some ridiculous howling noises that sounded more like a goat being slaughtered than a Sasquatch. He did this for about a minute and then turned around and looked at me and said, "See nothing, what did I tell you, all a myth." Right about the second he said that, there was a vocalization way off in the forest. "You hear that, man?" I asked. "Hear what?" "That call, off in the distance." You're not going to fool me with that," he said. Morgan was half deaf, but he'd never admit it, and that's why he couldn't hear the call. I told him I wasn't messing with him, but he wouldn't buy it. Now I couldn't say at that time what made the call. All I knew is it was a long, long ways away, and it was powerful. I reckoned it was probably as far as the next mountain over from us, and that was at least 4 miles. I stood still, listening for any more calls, and all I could hear was dead silence. Everything was getting to be a real orange color as the sun got lower in the sky, and I figured it was time to stop dilly-dallying and get back on the road. I was thankful that whatever made that call was somewhere in the forest, far away. Little did I know there was a big target on both of our backs after that stop along the highway, and if we were wise, we would have turned around and went back. I glanced at the Sasquatch crossing sign again, and I didn't find it as funny this time. Then we hit the road again. About 3 miles north, the temperature began to drop rapidly. It was strange. I could even see some frost forming on the grass next to the road. Only a few miles back where we stopped, it was still probably in the low 60s. I was thinking the climb up the mountain must be the culprit, but we couldn't have gained more than 100 feet of elevation over those 3 miles. As I was trying to make sense of it, I was caught off guard. I saw a runner in the forest to my right, a humanoid figure moving at the same speed as I was. I glanced down at the speedometer. I was going over 40, so I had to double-check what I was seeing, and clear as day. There were its arms each at a 90 degrees angle, pivoting back and forth as it ran, posture totally upright, its eyes fixed straight ahead of it. It was running so fast it almost looked like it was floating. The trees and other still objects moved past me in a blur, while this creature stayed even with me. I slowed down and motioned for Morgan to slow down, so I could point it out to him. He rode up next to me and asked what's the matter. I pointed at the runner. Right as I pointed at it, the creature dropped to the forest floor, basically disappearing out of sight. Morgan yelled over the engine noise. "What?" I pointed again at the being lying flat on the ground. It was about 100 feet away from us, and from where we were standing, it looked just like a pile of rocks on the ground. If I hadn't seen it running, I wouldn't have had any idea that it was a living creature. I shouted, "It's right there, man. Look, that's its head, and there's its arm right there." "I think Rich really gave you the crazy disease, Danny," he told me. "Next time anyone says a word to us about Bigfoot and a Denny's, I think we ought to just walk out of there. Those folks love to hear themselves talk, don't they? Let's go, Dan. There ain't no Bigfoot monsters here." Now Morgan was talking to me like I was crazy, and I guess I couldn't blame him. But it hurt my feelings a bit. I knew what I saw. I kept my head turned over my shoulder as we got up to speed, and the creature stayed behind. It was still lying on the ground, and I was thankful for that. I wanted to put as much ground between me and that thing as possible. Unfortunately, as I would soon find out, it was following us. About a mile up the road, I heard a loud snap, the sound of wood splitting, a big whoosh, then Morgan cursing and a collision. I looked over my shoulder, and there's Morgan flying airborne towards the ditch at the side of the road, and right behind him was a full-size tree fallen in the middle of the road. It landed just behind me and just in front of Morgan. So there he was on the ground. He wasn't moving. I thought he was dead. I stopped and got off my motorcycle as quickly as I could, totally forgetting the dangers that lay beyond the tree line. I ran over to him, and he was just looking up at the sky. "I saw it, man." "Saw what, buddy?" "Bigfoot. They're real." And then he closed his eyes. Seconds went by, and I thought he passed, until he opened his eyes abruptly. "Is she okay?" he asked. "She?" "My bike." I looked over, and the hog was, let's just say, in need of some work. I didn't want to crush his spirits, so I said, "Yeah, she's just fine, buddy. Now we need to get out of here. We'll go back for your bike first thing tomorrow. It's going to be all right." "Promise," said Morgan. "Yeah, man, let's go." "All right," he said, and he got up like nothing happened. It was a miracle. Didn't even break a bone in that fall. I swear that man's got 9 lives. I guess he owes it to the fact that he's only 100-something pounds, light as a feather. I stood there with my hand out in case he needed some help, and he shook his head and said, I can walk. I was so thankful he was alive. I forgot all about the fact that we were being stalked by Sasquatch, and all of a sudden Morgan points over towards my bike, and I look over, and there are 2 of them. 2 Sasquatches walking up onto the road, looking intently towards the motorcycle. They were both holding primitive stone weapons, a stick with sharpened pieces of obsidian fastened to it by something like twine. I think it must be the Sasquatch version of a machete. Both were well over 7 feet tall and incredibly muscular. They had wide noses with deep-set eyes that were much smaller than most people's eyes. Their foreheads were sloped back and their skulls were like cones. They wore primitive jewelry, and one of them even had a nose piercing with a fragment of bone sticking through his nose, and the other one had earrings that looked a lot like what we call gauges. The one with the pierced nose watched us closely, as we stood back with our hands up to try and tell him we didn't want any trouble. Meanwhile, the other Sasquatch with the gauges looked at the motorcycle like he was trying to figure out how it worked. I thought I would break the silence and said, "That's a '93 Harley-Davidson Sportster. Do you like it?" And about the moment I spoke, the one with the nose piercing started waving his machete at us and yelling something in his own language. I took it as a sign I should shut up, so we waited there hopelessly, not knowing what their intentions were. It didn't take long to find out, though. The leader, or that's what he seemed to be, hopped on the bike and then the other one followed. They used their feet to push themselves along, at a snail's pace up the road. They clearly had no idea how to operate a motorcycle. I was just happy they were leaving. The one with the nose ring turned around at us one last time and waved his machete at us while laughing. Before he could even turn back around, the other one's hand must have found the throttle and he accelerated so fast, the one in the back fell off flat on his back, while the others sped recklessly up the mountain road, swerving all over the place. And right at this moment, a semi-truck going around 70 miles per hour appeared in the distance, heading straight towards the Sasquatch who was in the wrong lane. The truck was going too fast to steer clear, and the Sasquatch must have accidentally hit the throttle again because he was picking up speed. There was nothing that could be done to avoid the inevitable, and before you know it, a cataclysmic collision of epic proportions took place, sending the Sasquatch airborne, while the truck lost control and flipped over on the back of the road. Morgan and I both looked up with our mouths open as the 8-feet-tall giant flipped and spun through the air like a porcelain spinning ballerina doll soaring right over our heads. It was as if it was happening in slow motion. Finally, gravity brought him back down onto the pavement with a thud and he yelled out in grief. He stopped moving and I thought he was dead. If there's anything that can kill a Sasquatch, it's a semi going 70 miles per hour. I figured his buddy would go over to help him out, sort of like how I went over to Morgan when he fell. But instead the bastard went straight towards the truck and then ran back into the forest with a pig in his hand. It turns out the truck was a hog truck, and when the trailer flipped over during the crash, it ejected several pigs onto the road. We decided it was the right thing to head over to the truck and see if the driver was okay. Plus, that was the only shelter anywhere near us, and we were like sitting ducks out on the road. So we crossed over to the other side of the road and went to the cab of the truck. It wasn't completely totaled, and I was able to get the passenger's door open. Unfortunately, the fellow behind the wheel wasn't moving. His head was against the steering wheel, arms flopped to his side. I shook him around and he wouldn't move, but he was still breathing. Big mark on his head where it must have hit the steering wheel, knocked him out cold, but he was still alive. I was trying to wake the man up when Morgan pointed out the window and said, "We got company, Danny." And to my amazement, there were not one, not two, not three, but probably over a dozen Sasquatches emerging from the tree line with bloodthirsty expressions, headed straight towards the truck. "Doors locked?" I asked. "Yep. Sure good to know we got a centimeter of glass to protect us from these giant savages," said Morgan sarcastically. The entire horde moved straight towards us and we were both thinking it was over. To our surprise, they veered off to the side and went around to the back of the truck, and then I realized what they were after. The pigs. There were still pigs in the back, and we could faintly hear them being eaten alive as the beasts helped themselves to as much as they could consume, and there, the three of us were trapped in the cab of the truck, hoping we weren't going to be dessert. All of a sudden, something went flying through the air towards the forest. It was a pig. The Sasquatches must have decided to keep the rest as leftovers and began chucking the hogs several hundred feet back into the forest. We thought they were about done and that they would finally go back into the forest. Unfortunately, it didn't work out that way. When all the hogs were cleared out, the group of savage beasts went back to the cab of the truck and started throwing punches into the doors, leaving large dents in them, and one of them threw a rock through the windshield, nearly hitting Morgan right in the skull. At that point, the driver finally woke up, and when he realized what was happening, he went behind the seat and started rummaging through a box and came back with a shotgun. He asked me to roll down the window as he began to fire shots into the horde. He nailed one right in the head, knocking it down, and a few others it looked like he wounded. He was a darn good shot, and the Sasquatches seemed to lose their momentum, until eventually he ran out of shells. He cursed as he looked for some more ammo and found nothing, and that's when Morgan spoke up and said, "Fellas, I'm the one who got us into this in the first place. I told you I would believe when pigs fly, and I ain't just seen flying pigs today. I saw a flying Sasquatch. So if I die today, you can let the whole world know. I died a believer." He took off his shirt, opened the door, and ran out of the truck, making those same Bigfoot impressions he made earlier and yelling, "Here's your dessert, you ugly bastards." He didn't make it more than 20 feet before the group of them were on top of him, and when they got him, they dragged him back into the forest out of sight. Meanwhile, the trucker, who I found out was named Steve, was dialing for help on a cellular phone. This was the 90s and not many people had cell phones back then, so I was surprised to see that he had one and even more surprised that there was service on that mountain. When he explained to the operator what happened, they said hang on a minute, and they transferred him to another individual, and this other individual seemed to know everything about the situation. Before Steve even told him, he knew the route we were on, and he even knew the exact mile marker somehow. Eventually, Steve handed me the phone so I could provide more details.
"This was a carjacking?"
the man asked. "Motorcycle," I said.
"Can you describe the hijackers?"
"Well, 2 males about 7 feet tall, multiple piercings, and there were also around 14 others like them," I said.
14?
He asked. "Yes." He stopped for a second, and I heard him speak something inaudibly. He ended the call by saying,
"We'll be there in 10 minutes.
And hung up. We were pretty much out in the middle of nowhere. I didn't know how anybody could get there in 10 minutes, but they ended up doing it in only 9. These weren't cop cars, though. They were all unmarked black SUVs with no lights or anything. The vehicle in front went straight for the Sasquatch, who was still lying on the road half dead, and as if his day wasn't going bad enough already, proceeded to run over him. And I guess they weren't satisfied because they backed up the vehicle and ran over the creature again and then once more and again until there was no more sign of life from him. They threw the Sasquatch's body in the back of the SUV and drove off, completely ignoring both of us as we waved after them. It made no sense. They had no interest in helping us whatsoever, just taking the Sasquatch body and driving off with it, and so I realized I would need to take matters into my own hands. I wasn't going to quit until I found my buddy Morgan, dead or alive. The man at least deserved a proper burial, so I told Steve what I was planning, and he told me I should really rethink my decision. I would sit on it, though, and he realized he couldn't convince me otherwise. He wished me luck and went back to his truck to try and call for help again. I walked down and up the bar ditch and into the forest, right where the creatures took Morgan, and it didn't take me long to find their tracks. They went pretty much in a straight line, perpendicular to the road. I called out Morgan's name, and the only response was silence. It was around dusk and visibility was low, and I was having to hunch over the ground like a hound dog to keep myself from losing the tracks. Eventually, they led to a steep cliff and stopped, and at the base of the cliff, there was some writing in the dirt. I read it, and it said, "Don't follow, already gone," with Morgan's initials next to it, MJ. Already gone, don't follow. I didn't know what it meant. I took a second look at the writing, and it was definitely Morgan's handwriting, so I was at a loss for what to do. I couldn't go any farther with that cliff in front of me, and there weren't any tracks or signs of life anywhere in the vicinity of the cliff. I just paced around like a lost dog until my common sense kicked in and told me to head back. I did have a wife back at home and a dog. I would never be able to forget about my buddy, though, although I guess he told me with his own words, "Don't follow," so I guess he just wanted the best for me. Right as I was about to turn around, an acorn hit my head. I looked around and then looked up. It was Morgan. He was leaning down at the edge of the cliff, looking at me with a big grin on his face, smiling and waving. "Ha, hey buddy, you're alive, man. You really do have 9 lives, don't you?" He didn't respond to me, just kept smiling. Ah, right, he's half deaf, I remembered, but he's not that deaf. I was only maybe 60 feet below him. Morgan? I asked. He stood up and began to walk along the edge of the cliff. At that point, I could see a figure behind him, with its hand out like it was controlling Morgan's movements, almost like a puppet. I took a step back so I could see more of the scene, and sure enough, it was one of those creatures, seeming to control Morgan's movements. Wherever he went, he moved rigidly and robotically as he walked back and forth at the edge of the cliff. Finally, he waved one last time at me and turned around, pivoting on his heel like a soldier, before rigidly walking back into the forest while the shadow of the creature followed him. I knew something was wrong and I wanted to save him desperately, so I started trying to climb up the rock cliff, and with every few feet I gained, I fell back down. I was too fat, I couldn't do it. Morgan was long gone in more ways than one, and I had no choice but to head back with my head hung low. When I neared the end of the forest, I saw flashing red and blue lights by the truck. Steve managed to get some actual help out to us, and I immediately told them that my buddy was somewhere in the woods, taken prisoner by those creatures. They looked at me with a confused look, but eventually hesitantly began to search the forest with their flashlights. I led them to the location I last saw him, and when they looked up the steep cliff, they talked to each other for a few minutes, before saying they would need to resume the search tomorrow. As much as I tried, I couldn't convince them to keep searching, and I was pretty pissed off. They assured me that they'd have a search team out early next morning, and they would keep me updated. There really wasn't much more I could do at that point, so I went back with them to the road, and they drove me back to my house. I called in every day to see if they found him. Same story every time, nothing. This went on for a year until I finally gave up and decided he was gone for good. I became real depressed after that, and things weren't easy. I managed to get a hold of Rich though, and that man helped me to stay sane during this all. As well as Steve, the three of us would meet up at that same Denny's every so often and talk about our encounters. If it weren't for those gentlemen, I might not be here today. A year later, on the exact same day the tragedy happened, September 23rd, I was having a cup of coffee while reading the news when I heard a knock at my door. My wife went and opened it and she said, "Dan, someone's here to see you." I got up slowly and went to the door, and I looked down, and there, standing before my eyes, was my buddy Morgan. I went up to hug him and he seemed surprised and said, "What's this all about, Danny? I just came to bring you some extra deer meat. We had to clear out of our freezer from last year." "I can't believe you're still alive, man," I said. "What? I ain't that old," he replied. "How did you survive living with Bigfoot for the last 2 years?" "You mean my wife? Well, it ain't easy." And the more I talked to him, the more I realized he had no recollection of anything that happened. I brought him to Denny's with Steven and Rich, and even though Steve was right there with me, telling him what happened, he still didn't believe it. And as a matter of fact, he didn't even recognize Steve, but he did remember Rich, and he thought the whole thing was Rich's idea to get him to believe. "Rich, maybe it would be best if you don't try and force your opinion about Bigfoot onto everyone else," Morgan said. "'Cause as for me, I'll believe it. When pigs fly." Hey family, a very big thank you to Smokey Sasquatch Stories for allowing me to narrate such an awesome tale. Be sure to check out their YouTube channel for more of their awesome works. If you would like to support us and make a donation, I'd be very much appreciative. I do have PayPal and a Buy Me a Coffee account. Be sure to also check out our merch store. There are plenty of items and designs to choose from. If you enjoyed this video, then why not check out the next one here? You can also follow us. All my socials and all my other links are contained within the Linktree link below. Take care, everyone, and I hope you all have a wonderful and peaceful night. And don't forget, where fear is, happiness is not.